All right, today we're pulling back the curtain on something pretty wild. We're talking about a strategy that the super rich use to live off their massive fortunes without ever actually touching the original money. Yeah, it sounds a little dramatic, I know, but it's a very real and completely legal playbook for creating serious generational wealth.
So, have you ever looked at some of the wealthiest people out there and just wondered, how do they do it? How are they living these incredible lives, funding new companies, making gigantic purchases, all while their stock portfolio or their real estate empire just seems to get bigger and bigger? I mean, they're clearly not selling everything off, so where's all that cash coming from?
Well, it's not magic, that's for sure. It's actually a very deliberate three-step strategy. It's a way for them to use their wealth without ever having to sell it off. And here's the kicker. It lets them do all this without triggering those huge tax bills that the rest of us would face.
And that method has a pretty memorable name. Buy, borrow, die. Yep, you heard that right. At its core, it's all about tapping into the value of your growing assets in a super tax-efficient way. So let's break down exactly how this whole thing works.
So, the whole strategy really unfolds in these three distinct phases, just like the name says. We're going to walk through each one so you can see exactly how they all connect to create this incredibly powerful financial engine.
Okay, let's dive in. It all starts with the foundation, which is, you guessed it, the buy phase.
So step one is pretty straightforward on the surface. You've got to acquire assets that you expect to appreciate, to grow in value over the long haul. This isn't about quick flips or day trading. We're talking about building a real, solid foundation of wealth.
And what kind of assets are we talking about? Well, think stocks in solid, promising companies. Think prime real estate, or maybe ownership in private businesses. You could even be talking about things like fine art or rare collectibles. The key, the absolute goal here, is to build a portfolio of stuff that's going to be worth way more down the road than it is today. This is the bedrock.
Okay, so you've got these assets and they're growing in value. Fantastic. But how do you actually use that wealth without selling them? That's the million-dollar question, right? And that brings us to the most ingenious part of this whole strategy. Step 2, borrow.
Right, the borrow phase. This is really the engine that makes the whole thing go. Instead of selling your assets to get cash, you just use them as collateral. You go to a bank and get a low-interest loan against their value.
And right here, this is the aha moment. This is the absolute key to the entire strategy. You ready? Borrowed money isn't considered income. Let that sink in. Since it's a loan, not a sale, you don't pay a single cent of income tax or capital gains tax on that cash you get. It's a total game changer.
Let's just look at the difference here, because it's huge. Say you sell $1 million worth of stock that's grown a lot. Boom! You could immediately owe hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital gains tax. You're left with way less cash. But if you borrow $1 million against that exact same stock, you get the full million completely tax-free. And this is huge, your original stock is still sitting in your portfolio continuing to grow in value. See the difference? It's massive.
Okay, so you've bought your assets, you've borrowed against them to fund your life, but wait a minute. What about all those loans? You've got to pay them back eventually, right? Well, that leads us to the final and maybe the most surprising piece of this puzzle, the die phase.
Now, this final step is all about dealing with those outstanding loans through really careful estate planning. The whole goal is to pass on both the valuable assets and the debt that's attached to them to your heirs in the most efficient way possible.
And the magic key here is a little tax provision called the step-up in basis. So here's how that works. Let's say you bought a stock for like $10 a share a long time ago, and by the time you pass away, it's worth $1,000. Well, your kids inherit that stock as if they bought it for $1,000. All that gain from 10 to 1,000, poof. From a tax perspective, it's just erased, gone.
So with that cost basis stepped up to the current market value, your heirs can just sell off a small part of those assets to pay back the loans. And because their cost basis is so high, they trigger little to no capital gains tax when they sell. The rest of the fortune? It's theirs, completely debt-free. And a lot of times, this whole strategy is paired with a big life insurance policy that's specifically designed to wipe out any remaining debt just to make it even smoother. So, when you put all three pieces together, buy, borrow, die, you can really start to see why this is such an incredibly powerful strategy for building and, just as importantly, preserving wealth for generations. Let's just do a quick recap of the main benefits here.
First off, you get amazing tax efficiency, right? You're basically avoiding capital gains tax at every turn. Second, you get leverage. You can use that borrowed money to go buy even more assets, which just accelerates the whole cycle. Third, it's a phenomenal estate planning tool for passing wealth down the line. And finally, it just optimizes your cash flow. It creates this sustainable way for you to use your wealth without ever having to drain the well, so to speak.
And all of this leaves us with one last big question. This strategy is 100% legal and it's used all the time. But it does make you wonder, is it just a brilliant financial tool that's available to anyone who understands the rules of the game? Or is it a fundamental flaw in our tax system, a loophole that lets massive fortunes grow and get passed down almost entirely untaxed? It's definitely something to think about.